want to show you some things that I don't think you even knew existed. It goes against everything Manifest Destiny teaches about Native Americans. And I want you to know this part of our history because people erased it. And we'll get to that later on in the program. Erased it intentionally. Erased it intentionally. That's an important part of it.
The whole world belongs to black people.
Oh yeah, we got the mic. Oh yeah, we got the mic on. Let's do something today. So they said they found a skeleton in Mexico, but I have a problem with the wording that they used.
Who were these pioneers? A much earlier wave of Mongoloids, or another race altogether?
Now, I give them credit. They've been found a skeleton, whoopty whoop bob. It's nice, but after doing some checking, I don't like what they said.
Clues to the identity of the first Americans are emerging in rock shelters in the northeast and southeast of Brazil.
They're trying to promote something that's wrong.
The placing of the boy in the cage with a monkey is an outrage. The Negro race in America has a hard enough time as it is in getting away from the prejudice that is closely related to the monkey without having a member of the race placed on exhibition.
Leading men of science from Harvard.
Named Agassiz. I'm gonna let you know who he is. He's actually one of the most renowned and respected geologists that has existed. He went against the Darwinism evolution.
Leading men of science from Harvard and Princeton and Columbia University was saying that Africans were midway between an orangutan and a human being.
Ardipithecus was found in the mid-90s, but it was in very poor condition. Comes from about 40 miles away from where Lucy was found, but it's 4.4 million, so it's more than 1 million years older than Lucy.
Leading men of science from Harvard and Princeton and Columbia University was saying that Africans were midway between an orangutan and a human being.
It took about 3 or 4 years just to clean the specimen because the bones are so soft. Everybody thinks of it as a fossil of being some sort of hard rock.
Agassiz was appointed professor of natural history at University of Neuchâtel after visiting Harvard University. Mid-career, he emigrated to the United States in 1847 and became professor of zoology and geology at Harvard, and to head its Lawrence Scientific School and found its Museum of Comparative Zoology.
Everybody thinks of it as a fossil of being some sort of hard rock, but in this case, the fossil was more fragile and softer than the material around it.
Agassiz is known for his regimen of observational data, gathering and analysis. He made vast institutional and scientific contributions to zoology and geology and related areas, including writing multi-volume research books running to thousands of pages. He is particularly known for his contributions to ichthyological classification, including of extinct species, and to the study of geological history, including to the founding of glaciology.
So it took a lot of intense preparation. It had been damaged in a number of ways. Those had to be corrected. And we've been working on it for the past 10 years.
In the 21st century, his resistance to Darwinism, evolution, and the scientific racism implicit in his writings on human polyganism has tarnished his reputation and led to controversies over his legacy. So he went against the Darwinism evolution.
So 100 years later, it should not come as much of a surprise that many people still cling to these notions.
His resistance to Darwinism, evolution, and the scientific racism implicit in his writings on human polyganism has tarnished his reputation and led to controversies over his legacy. So he went against the Darwinism evolution. Because he knew better.
The exciting thing about it is that it's more complete than Lucy, and it has more informative parts than Lucy had.
Because he knew better. He did research. He saw it didn't fit with what he was finding.
Lucy had no hands or feet, but Ardipithecus has both. So it tells us a great deal about how humans evolved in terms of locomotion, but in terms of how they manipulated the world, and most importantly, how we differ from the way chimpanzees and gorillas evolved.
Many people still cling to these notions of European superiority, African inferiority.
The most striking thing is that everybody in the world...
Have you ever heard of Louis Agassiz? Have you ever heard of Louis Agassiz?
Everybody in the world, up to now, has thought that we evolved something that was generally chimpanzee-like.
He went against the Darwinism evolution because he knew better. He becomes controversial, and this basically takes him out of our textbooks. Have you ever heard of Louis Agassiz?
It turns out that chimpanzees have evolved from something that's more human-like. And so the evolution that we see is pretty much the reverse of what we thought.
That's got to be racist. There's no way. I'm going to just keep it real. There's no way.
I mean, they already gonna do their Darwin theory of evolution, but we know that's a lie.
By the last decades of the 19th century, Darwin's theory was increasingly popular among Germany's intellectual elite. Darwin had claimed that humans and other mammals were the product of what he called natural selection, a blind struggle for existence where the fittest survived and reproduced, and the less fit died off. In his book, The Descent of Man, Darwin made clear that his idea of natural selection had implications for human society.
Charles Darwin clearly was a social Darwinist. He was not as rabid a social Darwinist as some of his followers later on, but he clearly did believe that Darwinism should be applied to human societies.
Darwin worried that civilized societies were harming humanity by helping the poor, caring for the sick, and otherwise saving those who nature would have killed off. Darwin feared that such humanitarianism could eventually destroy the human race. Darwin also predicted that in the future, the civilized races of mankind would exterminate the inferior ones.
As founder of the American Birth Control League, which later became Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger was no doubt a controversial figure with disturbing views on eugenics, race, and population control. While some argue she even wanted to exterminate the Black race, others are trying to erase that part of her past.
The Mike Wallace Interview. In the eyes of some, Margaret Sanger has been a heroine. In the eyes of others, she's been a destructive force.
In her own words, Sanger pushed for a society that limited births to those she deemed fit to have children.
Europeans come to this continent, literally ethnically cleanse the indigenous population out of existence, kill them on a scale that has hardly been equaled, and refer to them as savages. That's an achievement. Who's the savage?
Darwin himself was ambivalent about some of the social implications of his theory. But in Germany, Darwin's ideas supplied a new generation of political leaders, social thinkers, and scientists with what they regarded as a biological justification for world domination.
If you read the scientists of the day in the late 19th and early 20th century, many of them were promoting racism and even racial extermination, extinction of races.
I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born.
In 1916, Sanger opened the country's first birth control clinic. As a member of the American Eugenics Society, she advocated improving the genetic composition of humans through controlled reproduction of different races and classes.
They were promoting the gaining of living space, they were promoting competition, the things that we know of as social Darwinism. These were things being promoted by Charles Darwin himself to some degree, many other leading biologists.
She often wrote about the issue in the journal she founded, called the Birth Control Review. In 1919, writing,
I personally believe in the sterilization of the feeble-minded, the insane, and the syphilitic. The most urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the over-fertility of the mentally and physically defective.
Many point to a 1923 New York Times interview as proof of Sanger's racist motives, in which she referred to people as weeds, saying,
It means the release and cultivation of the better racial elements in our society and the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extirpation of defective stocks, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization.
The war of annihilation is a natural law, without which the organic world could not continue to exist at all. German zoologist Gustav Jaeger, 1870.
Hayden Ludwig, an investigative researcher, has extensively studied Sanger's life and writings.
She talked about the need for race betterment through controlling these weeds, basically undesirable people.
Just as in nature, the struggle for existence is the moving principle of evolution and perfection, so also in world history, the destruction of the weaker nations through the stronger is a postulate of progress. German ethnologist Friedrich Hellwald, 1875.
In 1939, after opening another clinic in Harlem, the birth control activist launched the Negro Project, an initiative supported by black leaders, such as civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois.
I'm a house nigga, a good one.
Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They'd send some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master, good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes, they ate the worst food, and they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh, yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes. I'm a field Negro.
Critics claim the program used the pretense of better health and family planning for poor blacks in the South as an attempt to limit the black race.
According to Darwin's theory, wars have always been of the greatest importance for the general progress of the human species. The physically weaker, the less intelligent, the morally lower, must give place to the stronger. German biologist Heinrich Ziegler, 1893.
Ludwig says some on the left grapple with Sanger's past and how to interpret her legacy.
They know when she writes about human weeds, they know that it's repulsive. They know it's disgusting. The left will never abandon Margaret Sanger because if they do, she's the foundation of so many of their views.
Sanger once shared her vision for a preferred race at a women's branch of the Ku Klux Klan.
Wait a damn minute. Wait a damn.
Writing in her autobiography,
Always, to me, any aroused group was a good group.
Not all German Darwinists defended war as a biological imperative. Some, in fact, criticized it for undermining natural selection. They feared that wars in Europe would kill off too many of the superior races. Yet even these pacifist Darwinists tended to approve of wars waged against races they considered lower on the evolutionary scale, like the native peoples of Africa.
Despite those views, liberals praise Sanger's work while ignoring her history.
I admire Margaret Sanger enormously.
Bitch, are you dumb? Pardon me? Are you dumb? I think she's dumb.
Her courage, her tenacity.
We know that's a lie. We know that's a lie. But let's do this right now. I just want to... I found this teenage female skeleton. Okay. The year it dates, that's pretty old. I like that. That's old. It sounds like it's a mongoloid.
Who were these pioneers? A much earlier wave of mongoloids, or another race altogether?
Mongoloid is the general physical type of some or all of the populations of East Asia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Siberia, the Arctic, parts of the Americas and the Pacific Islands, and small parts of South Asia. Individuals within these populations often share certain associated phenotypic traits, such as epicanthic folds and neoteny. In terms of population, it is the most widely distributed physical type, constituting over a third of the human species. The word is formed by the base word Mongol, and the suffix oid, which means resembling, so therefore the term literally means resembling Mongols. It was introduced by early ethnology primarily to describe various Central and East Asian populations, one of the proposed three major races of humanity.
No, it might be a mongoloid and a negrito. It just may be.
Archaeologists there have recently unearthed human remains. Prehistoric skulls were found buried in layers of soil 9,000 to 12,000 years old. They are the oldest skulls in the Americas.
So, somehow it ended up in this hole, Spanish for black hole. Hoyo negro. Okay.
This is the oldest of them all. The skull of a young woman nicknamed Luthia by scientists. Can she tell us who the first Americans were?
This is ironic, but it's 13,000. It's 13,000. I'm not liking that description right there. It says the remains have been described as the oldest. The oldest?
History is being manipulated for an end
in itself.
And I want you to know this part of our history because people erased it, and we'll get to that later on in the program. Erased it intentionally. Erased it intentionally.
Are you sure about that? The oldest. I think we're going to stop right here.
Walter Neves is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. He has been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to.
91.
He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid.
Oldest, most complete, genetically intact. I think they might just want to say most complete.
He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid.
Although some forensic anthropologists and other scientists continue to use the term in some contexts, the term Mongoloid is now considered derogatory by most anthropologists due to its association with disputed typological models of racial classification.
He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid, an ancestor of the American Indians.
91.
But then he fed the measurements into the computer.
The term Mongoloid comes from the Mongol people who caused great terror throughout Eurasia during the Mongol Empire invasions, and the new appearance of the Mongols and paranoia was used throughout the Western world to create a new racial classification. The words Mongol, Mongolian, Mongoloid were extensively used throughout European history since the 13th century, usually in a negative manner.
When we started running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing just people to be Mongoloid.
Like they got one of the oldest. That would be nice to say one of the oldest, but I don't think they could even say one of the oldest at this number. It says 13.
In fact, the analysis was showing just people was anything except Mongoloid.
However, in the modern sense, Mongol refers to the Mongol ethnic group and Mongolian refers to something related with the country of Mongolia, not necessarily in terms of ethnicity. The first use of the term Mongolian race was by Christoph Meiners in a binary racial scheme. His two races were labeled Tatar-Caucasians, which comprised Celtic and Slavic groups, and Mongolians.
In fact, the analysis was showing just people was anything except Mongoloid.
So who was Luthia? And where did she come from?
Johann Friedrich Blumenbach said that he borrowed the term Mongolian from Christoph Meiners to describe the race he designated second, which includes that part of Asia beyond the Ganges and below the river Amur, which looks toward the south, together with the islands and the greater part of these countries, which is now called Australian. In 1861, Isidore Geoffroy St. Hilaire added the Australian as a secondary race of the principal race of Mongolian. In the 19th century, Georges Cuvier used the term Mongolian again as a racial classification, but additionally included American Indians under the term.
Let me check something out real quick. I just want to see if I can find an older one real quick. So let's see if we can find an older skeleton. Oh, she's not in Mexico. Oh, she's not in Mexico.
The first stage was to make a three-dimensional CAT scan of Luthia's skull in order to build a replica. The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists.
Oh, she's not in Mexico. We gotta look her up by name. They done did too much already. See, Google, why did you do that? See, you play too damn much. I wanted that to be a surprise.
The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
That, to me, is a Negroid face that has all the features that you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being mongoloid.
Why would you do this? Why would you do this? Why would you just be so petty?
The ancestor was completely different than anyone would have predicted.
Why would you do... Okay. That's what they want to say. That's what they want to say. Let's go into it. Let's go into it though. Down here. Now, mind you, this is about the date of how old this skeleton may be. This one. But let me look at something. Let me look at something. Down here. Is it down here? Ooh. See that don't, that looks like it's a So skeletons in this area is older than this. Now here we go with the, again, they want to say they from Africa.
He becomes controversial, and this basically takes him out of our textbooks. Have you ever heard of Louis Agassiz? Because as you can see here, let me just zoom in a little bit, right? This is Louis Agassiz, again, Geological Sketches, 1866, this version of it. And it says here, contents, page 1, volume 1, America, the Old World.
They want to say they from Africa. They want to say they from Africa. They want to say they from Africa. But notice the name that they done. Shamin? Who?
You're gonna be called out. The majority of our Pacific is black. And when we say we're proud to be Pacific, it's proud to be black.
What are they?
America, the first inhabited of the continent. Okay. So it was the belief of the wise Thomas Jefferson that America was the first seed of the human race, and that the Eastern Hemisphere was peopled from the Western.
Okay, but they want to say they from Africa. I don't get that. When clearly they look like these are the first Americans.
A letter written by him to President Stiles of Yale College in 1786, while he represented the United States at the court of France, was published in the American Museum for November 1787, page 492. Go verify the source. From this letter, the following extract is taken, clearly stating Mr. Jefferson's belief that the first inhabitants of Asia, who so much resembled the American Aborigines, went from America to Asia instead of coming from Asia to America.
Do you have any background, or do you have any knowledge of how Native Americans, was there a relationship with Native Hawaiians? How'd that all start?
Since I moved here in 2017, I've interacted with Native Americans that have lived here on the island, or, are half Hawaiian, half Native American. Over time, I've heard different stories. One story that I heard was that there were several Native Hawaiians that went to work on the railroad on the West Coast, especially in Washington. One family I know, that's a story they shared with me. And so then while the men were there, they met some Native American ladies and, began a relationship and a family. Yeah.
As natives do.
Right, exactly. You seek each other out, something familiar.
It says here that Mr. Jefferson believed that the first inhabitants of Asia, who so much resemble the American Aborigines, and we ain't talking about the what you think of a Chinese person of today or any of the light-skinned Mongols.
Arthur de Gobineau defined the extent of the Mongolian race by the yellow, the Altaic, Mongol, Finnish and Tatar branches. Later, Thomas Huxley used the term Mongoloid and included American Indians as well as Arctic Native Americans. Other terms were proposed, such as Messigroid, but Mongoloid was widely adopted. In 1940, anthropologist Franz Boas included the American race as part of the Mongoloid race, of which he mentioned the Aztecs of Mexico and the Maya of Yucatan. Boas also said that, out of the races of the Old World, the American native had features most similar to the East Asiatic. In 1981, Elizabeth Smith Hagel-Watts, who taught anthropology at Tulane University, said that the question of American Indians being a separate race from Asiatic Mongoloids is a question of how much genetic difference a population needs from another population to be considered a major race. She said that even the people who consider American Indians to be a separate race acknowledge that they are genetically closest to Asians.
Siberian-looking Asians, but we're talking about the original Negroid, right? Negritos, they call them.
And you're gonna be called out. The majority of our Pacific is black.
In the Philippines and the Malays, all this is Asia too. And they do resemble the American Aborigines.
In 1983, Douglas J. Futuyma, professor of evolutionary processes at the University of Michigan, said that the inclusion of Native Americans and Pacific Islanders under the Mongoloid race was not recognized by many anthropologists who consider them distinct races.
And it says here that they actually went from America to Asia instead of coming from Asia to America.
What? Oh, that you want to promote that Darwin's theory of evolution, that everything is out of Africa. I understand.
America, the old world. Again, firstborn among the continents. Firstborn among the continents. America, so far as her physical history is concerned, has been falsely denominated the New World. Again, has been falsely denominated the New World. This is not the New World. This is the true old world.
They want to promote that somehow all of us were savages.
Europeans come to this continent, literally ethnically cleanse the indigenous population out of existence, kill them on a scale that has hardly been equaled, and refer to them as savages. That's an achievement. Who's the savage?
Out of Africa, ape, and then we evolved into white people, so now white people feel like they have a reason for taking our land.
Don't you believe that the black and white can live side by side in harmony?
If I said yes, that don't make it right, because they can't.
Just understand that don't make sense. That just make y'all look like y'all deformed or mutated one of us.
I was taught that you respected black folk, but not really as human beings, more like cats and dogs and cows. You wouldn't mistreat a cat or a dog in my family, and you wouldn't mistreat a black person.
Because if you say he's a human being, then you're saying he's an extension of you.
But hey, if y'all want to go with that reckless thinking, but
history, the Europeans began to manipulate history when they rose and began to expand into the broader world in the 15th and the 16th century, because they had to justify the slave trade and they had to justify the colonial system that followed.
But just know that my man's over here, he found some of the oldest skeletons already, though they not the most complete skeletons. And she's not the oldest skeleton, but he's found some of the oldest skeletons. and they're in Chile.
I return you my thanks for the communication relative to the Western country. When we reflect how long we have inhabited those parts of America which lie between the Allegheny and the ocean, that no monument has ever been found in them which indicate the use of iron among its aboriginal inhabitants, that they were as far advanced in art, at least, as the inhabitants on the other side of the Allegheny, a good degree of infidelity may be excused as to the new discoveries which suppose regular fortifications of brickwork to have been in use among the Indians on the waters of the Ohio. Entrenchments of earth they might indeed make, but bricks is more difficult. The art of making it may have preceded the use of iron, but it would suppose a greater degree of industry than men in the hunter state usually possess. I should like to know whether General Parsons himself saw actual bricks among the remains of fortifications. I suppose the settlement of our continent is of the most remote antiquity. The similitude between its inhabitants and those of the eastern parts of Asia render it probable that ours are descended from them or they from ours. The latter is my opinion.
In 1984, Roger J. Lederer, professor of biological sciences at California State University at Chico, separately listed the Mongoloid race from Pacific Islanders and American Indians when he enumerated the geographical variants of the same species known as races. We recognize several races: Inuit, American Indians, Mongoloid, Polynesian.
The latter is my opinion, that they are from ours.
So just kind of understand that he could have put one of the oldest, one of the most complete.
Founded on this single fact, among the red inhabitants of Asia, there are but few languages radically different. All right, so listen to this. But among our Indians, the number of languages is infinite, and we've gone over this in other presentations.
The ancestor was completely different than anyone would have predicted.
Right, there was more languages here in the Americas, more dialects than in Africa. In Asia, there are a few radically different languages, but among the Indians, the number of languages is infinite, which are so radically different as to exhibit at present no appearance of their having been derived from a common source. The time necessary for the generation of so many languages must be immense.
But don't say oldest. It's not the oldest.
The Europeans began to manipulate history when they rose and began to expand into the broader world in the 15th and the 16th century.
Erased it intentionally. That's an important part.
And then she's not Paleo-Indian, because you guys are trying to promote something else. See how it says Paleo-Indian with the dash right there? Yeah.
In 1995, Dr. Marta Mirazan-La of the Department of Biological Anthropology at Cambridge University said all Asian populations are grouped under the name Mongoloid. In 1998, Jack D. Forbes, professor of Native American Studies and Anthropology at the University of California, Davis, said that the racial type of the indigenous people of the Americas does not fall into the Mongoloid racial category.
In fact, the analysis was showing these people was anything except Mongoloid.
See, you guys over here, you're promoting this Siberian thing right here. See, Siberia.
Forbes said that due to the various physical traits indigenous Americans exhibit, some with head shapes which seem hardly distinct from many Europeans, indigenous Americans must have either been formed from a mixture of Mongoloid and Caucasoid races, or they descend from the ancestral, common type of both Mongoloid and Caucasoid races of Europeans. Finns were previously considered by some scholars to be partly Mongoloid, dating to claims by Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. This is no longer the case.
In fact, the analysis was showing these people was anything except Mongoloid.
Let's bring this up. They're trying to promote this again.
because they had to justify the slave trade and they had to justify the colonial system that followed.
This land bridge. But like I just showed, that don't go with the correlation of the history that he and Nari went through.
All right, there's a long history of habitation here. Mr. Jefferson gave the best reason he could for his belief that the first inhabitants went from America to Asia instead of coming from Asia to America. It's his time, however, scientific research in its wonderful progress has developed other reasons for the truth of this theory.
Like this don't correlate.
The Europeans began to manipulate history when they rose and began to expand into the broader world in the 15th and the 16th century because they had to justify the slave trade and they had to justify the colonial system that followed. And modern racism has its incubation in that period.
Right? What he said right here is giving some indication, but I believe it's in reverse.
Populations of Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, New Ireland, New Britain is massive. They're literally 80% of the Pacific. Polynesia is very small in terms of the number of Melanesians there are in our Pacific. And if you don't know your history, go look at a photo of the old Hawaiians, look at the photos of the old Samoans, look at the photos of the old Maori, they're black.
Like from America to these other places, right?
And they were called monkey. Acknowledge your self-hatred. You maybe have some anti-blackness within you, but our ancestors are black, our people are black. Get used to it. Being dark-skinned is beautiful. It is not derogatory to me. And get with the times already.
To these other places. But let's there was something else that I had to, you know what I mean? We already did this work. That's crazy. They're trying to rewrite history right in front of us.
You're saying, I'm assuming, that history is being manipulated for an end.
Now, they did genetic testing on this, right? They're trying to say it's the oldest again. But we just went over Paleo-American.
Ain't no fucking way.
Paleo-American, right? Right? See how that went straight back to this? No.
History is being manipulated for an end.
In itself.
In itself.
History, the Europeans began to manipulate history when they rose and began to expand.
They did genetic testing. And then they found the lineages of who? So they're trying to rewrite the history. They trying to rewrite the history.
History is being manipulated.
What the fuck? Bruh, they not from that way, bruh. Right? They're trying to say they're from Siberia.
This is no longer the case as Finns are considered typically European. Finns show very little if any Mediterranean and African genes, but almost 10% of Finnish genes seem to be shared with Siberian populations. Nevertheless, more than 80% of Finnish genes are from a single ancient northeastern European population, while most Europeans are a mixture of 3 or more principal components.
The Europeans began to manipulate history when they rose and began to expand into the broader world in the 15th and the 16th century because they had to justify the slave trade.
They not from there. We already did this already. And ancient Native Americans who are, what is this? Again, ancient what? Bering? What?
In fact, the analysis was showing these people was anything except Mongoloid.
What? That's not what he described. Let's go back again.
In fact, the analysis was showing these people was anything except Mongoloid.
Let's go back. Why would you make that one the oldest one if we found this one to be the oldest one? And then somehow that one's paleo. We want to kind of make this one paleo, but he describes she's not paleo. So let's Again, what the fuck, bro? What the fuck, bro? I mean, she's not the oldest one, but he done found the oldest ones, and none of them is from over there. They didn't come from that way. So, genetic and pheno again. Her facial features were narrow, projecting, pronounced. Chin, dissimilar, strikingly dissimilar to most Native Americans and their indigenous Syrian for what?
That to me is a Negroid face that has all the features you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being a Mongoloid.
Professor of Anthropology, Okazuo Takeru with the International Research Center for Japanese Studies, Kyoto, said that there are Neo-Mongoloids and Paleo-Mongoloids. Okazuo said Neo-Mongoloids have extreme Mongoloid, cold-adapted features, and they include the Chinese, Buryates, Eskimo and Chukchi. In contrast, Okazuo said Paleo-Mongoloids are less Mongoloid and less cold-adapted. He said Burmese, Filipinos, Polynesians, January Mon and the indigenous peoples of the Americas were Paleo-Mongoloid. History of the concept. The earliest systematic use of the term was by Blumenbach in De Generis Humani Varietate Nativa. Blumenbach included East and Southeast Asians, but not Native Americans or Malays, who were each assigned separate categories. In 1865, biologist Thomas Huxley presented the views of polygenesists as some imagine their assumed species of mankind were created where we find them. Mahinder Kumar Bazin of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Delhi suggested in a review of an article referencing Murant 1983 that the Caucasoids and the Mongoloid almost certainly became differentiated from one another somewhere in Asia, and that another differentiation, which probably took place in Asia, is that of the Australoids, perhaps from a common type before the separation of the Mongoloids. In 1996, Professor of Anthropology, Okazuo Takeru of the International Research Center for Japanese Studies, Kyoto, said Mongoloids originated in Xinjiang during the Ice Age.
Again, they Negroid. What? Stop playing with me, bro. They not from that. So why would they?
And you're saying, I'm assuming, that history is being manipulated for an end.
In itself.
In itself.
Promote the other one. Oh, they done did a study and found this out. And then another comparison.
In 1999, Peter Brown of the Department of Anthropology and Paleoanthropology at the University of New England evaluated 3 sites with early East Asian modern human skeletal remains: Tsukaudian's Upper Cave and Minato-gawa in Okinawa, dated to between 10,175 to 33,200 years ago, and finds lack of support for the conventional designation of skeletons from this period as Proto-Mongoloid. He stated that the colonization of the Americas by 11Ka indicates an earlier date for the appearance of distinctively East Asian features. However, the earliest unequivocal evidence for anatomically East Asian people on the Asian mainland remains at 7,000 years BP. He saw this as possibility that migration across the Bering Strait sent in 2 directions and the first morphological Mongoloids evolved in the Americas.
I want to show you some things that I don't think you even knew existed. It goes against everything Manifest Destiny teaches about Native Americans.
What? What?
He saw this as possibility that migration across the Bering Strait sent in 2 directions and the first morphological Mongoloids evolved in the Americas.
It goes against everything Manifest Destiny teaches about Native Americans. And I want you to know this part of our history because people erased it, and we'll get to that later on in the program. Erased it intentionally.
What?
Don't you believe that the black and white can live side by side in harmony?
If I said yes, that don't make it right.
Stop playing with me.
That don't make it right because they can't. I was in Milwaukee just meddling the other day. Didn't nobody see me. And I saw white people, white babies, white girls, and they just was jeering and they hate and they just evil as they can be.
Because when you must talk in general.
Why is it you don't, your whole conversation now is to keep Negroes with you. Why you don't want us to leave you?
Well, because in my
Scared? You seem
estimation,
to be
Negro
so
people are
scared.
every bit as good as white people.
As good as white
Right.
people.
They're all the same. They're all God's
We're
people.
not saying we're not all God's people, because if whites was God's people, they wouldn't treat us like they do.
Because if you say he's a human being, then you're saying he's an extension of you.
Well, now
Not God's
you're
people.
talking again.
Jesus said there's no good in
You're
whites. It's
talking-
in the
you're
Bible.
talking-
What verse is that? Jesus says no good. John what?
8:44.
John 8:44. Where Jesus talking on white people. He said there's no good in you, and he said no, not one.
Hey, Cassius, you're talking.
I'm not Cassius. You still calling me? I can't get
Or
on with
Mohammed,
you.
you're talking in
I'm not no white
particulars when
man.
you have to talk in generality.
So you want to keep calling me a white man's name? I'm not white.
Oh, they just trying to disprove all of this. They're having a time trying to disprove my man's findings.
I want to show you some things that I don't think you even knew existed. It goes against everything Manifest Destiny teaches about Native Americans.
Yeah, they upset. So, wait. Let's go back to something. Because I've seen something very suspicious. I've seen something very suspicious. Oh, it's this. You guys tried to destroy it.
Europeans come to this continent, literally ethnically cleanse the indigenous population out of existence, kill them on a scale that has hardly been equaled, and refer to them as savages. That's an achievement. Who's the savage? The first time I encountered this was in a little town in Massachusetts called Deerfield. It's a reconstruction of what that little town looked like in colonial America. And in front of each house is a plaque that explains something about this house. And then description. On the 18th of October of 1702, the savages attacked. The first time I saw this, the savages. You come in here, destroy everything these people have, and they are the savages. That's an interesting move.
It is.
You know?
I hadn't thought of that before.
Think about it.
That's got to be racist. There's no way. I'm going to just keep it real. There's no way that.
So you guys destroyed it. You guys tried to destroy it.
And I want you to know this part of our history because people erased it. And we'll get to that later on in the program. Erased it intentionally.
And it's funny that you guys tried to destroy it in 2018. And then in November, you guys want to go against what he had already did.
Program. Erased it intentionally. That's an important part of it.
Okay, so you guys are trying to
manipulate history.
Nah, player. So years before, he did his work. He did his whole testing, and then you guys want to contradict him later on. Oh yeah, and then you guys want to do this. Then you want to do this. Disrespectful.
Even the Bible does not allow colonialism to go beyond my generation. And I am here to make that declaration that the honeymoon of colonialism, with all its gadgets, governance, education, agriculture, entertainment, sports, recreation, health and technology, and spirituality. It's time where the white Jesus must pack his bags and go back home.